Hey, y'all, welcome back. We had Christmas week off. We are going to ease back into judging the Judgmental podcast. The app will launch soon, but kind of today we just wanted to talk. We saw a really disturbing post on social media from a child, and the child has now, I can't tell actually. Could you tell if the child was of age or not?
No, no. He said he was waiting, to say something and to record that, but I don't think that it was necessarily because he was waiting until he was of age. It sounded like he was waiting because it's very hard for him to talk about it, and that
Mm-mm.
making the video made the whole situation real, and
Yep.
that was tough for him. And that's tough to hear. And while we did take the Christmas off, or the week of Christmas off, the emails kept coming and things kept getting posted. So there's a lot that was going on, even though courts were closed and we were taking time off. So we'll jump right back into it.
Yeah, I think people really are. I know I've been saying this forever, but they are done with family court. And on TikTok, there's this little challenge where you can make your predictions for 2026. And somebody posted on there, and this is an attorney that doesn't do family law that I've been following for a while. And he does a lot of good content, but he thinks that one of the major players in the midterm election, general election, is going to be family court reform.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that, but boy, that would be fascinating if it happens. It just doesn't seem to be mainstream enough to matter to the politicians. It's certainly, I haven't seen anything legislatively, and we see all kinds of knee-jerk kind of policy changes and things on the criminal front and from the judiciary in other regards, but not related to family court at all.
Yeah, but see, this is where I go back to my prediction that it's February of 2020. I really think police brutality was not mainstream at all. It was what they would call you and I, like radical outliers talking about stuff. And then all of a sudden we had those three incidents, and it had been happening for years and years and years. And it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. But I think when I talk to legislatures, they personally have, they know some of the GALs and FOCs that you and I talk about by name because their constituents complain about it.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. No, I'm hopeful that that prediction is right. I think that before that happens, before it becomes a major national issue for politicians, there will have to be the equivalent of, like the
Mhm.
Breonna Taylors, and there will have to be a rapid succession of high profile issues that the press finally starts actually covering the problems that exist instead of just giving lip service or repeating the lines that come out of the PR people in the courts.
Exactly. And I think what you're saying is there's going to have to be tragedies, honestly.
Well, there
And
are
there
there are
already are.
tragedies all the time. It'll just have to be
Mhm,
tragedies for people who are recognizable or celebrities or already have a
mhm.
platform
Yes.
in order for it to
And I
be
think
considered.
we've gotten to the point, you and I've talked about how all of these things were happening where there were bad outcomes for years and years and years. But you've also coupled the judiciary now with a level of incompetence that I don't think that we've ever seen before on a nationwide platform. We talk about, in particular, judges in Louisville that you and I both feel don't have any understanding. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but have a very low level understanding of even basic concepts of law when it comes to family court, right?
Sure, I mean that's the only conclusion that I can draw other than pure evil than these judges coming in and understanding clearly and making a conscious effort to deprive constitutional rights and to
Mhm.
ignore the law. And perhaps I'm naive, maybe that's happening, but it seems more plausible from what we've seen in the hundreds and hundreds of hours of court that we've watched that it's just a lack of understanding and it's a lack of competency to hold that position.
And a lack of accountability. It's like, if there was someone to hold them accountable, I think this could have been nipped in the bud a long time ago. I mean, and you see that throughout the country where you're talking about like the Judicial Conduct Commission or the equivalent. I think that Kentucky's Judicial Conduct Commission has only reprimanded 2 judges in all of 2025.
Yeah, so there's different levels of accountability, and it used to be that judges didn't want to get overturned on appeal for having
Mhm.
made an error, even if it were a technical small error. And what we're seeing is some of these judges being overturned for gross constitutional violations and then refusing to follow the direction that comes down from the Court of Appeals, just refusing to acknowledge that they have been reversed and just continuing on. So short of actually removing them from the bench or suspending them or threatening the job, I don't think that there is any level of accountability that's going to work. It used to be having your name on published opinions as being wrong, law is being made because of the mistakes you are making, was enough for a judge to actually maybe pick up a book.
Right,
Maybe
right.
read the law, maybe read basic civil procedure, but it's just not the case here. It's just, I don't know if the judges don't care, if they're just not reading it, but we've heard, at least from Judge Ogden, that, well, the Court of Appeals basically doesn't understand what we have to do here, so, I'm going to ignore the higher court's decision.
Which is insane. And that goes back, like, I wonder, I think there's so many different, I don't know, caveats or whatever that are happening there. And I think that these judges in particular, especially the Louisville judges, they defend each other at all costs. But you and I both know that they all have conflicts behind the scenes and they're all talking bad about the other one behind the scenes. I mean, saying horrific things. And this is like kind of to segue some, but, you know, actually just being around family and friends and everything for the holidays. Like, people that are listening, you have to understand how isolating and sad most of the judges' lives are when it comes to the way that they're talked about and the circles that they run in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, don't have personal knowledge of that, but I would imagine. I mean, you're subject to a lot of scrutiny, and
Right.
you know,
Well, and also you just have the political fighting. Like, some of these judges that are in pictures with other judges, the things they've told me about the other judge personally, like told
sure.
me, is so terrible. If anyone ever talked about me like that and then came to my home or tried to interact with me, I mean, it would be a non-starter. And this is all day, every day. And I think when I ran for office too, I just realized how sad and pathetic like politics and Louisville politics are, because it's a bunch of backstabbing and talking about people behind their back and this like weird competition for power. And it's very sad.
But
I mean,
that's
it's not a life I would
politics.
want.
I mean, I worked in DC. I worked in the middle of this kind of stuff, and that's just what it is. You make alliances, you make friends, those friends fall out of favor somewhere else, you ditch them and move on to the next person that can get you what you want. That's just the way that it works. I think it would be hard for people who genuinely want to do a good job and take their job very seriously, and at least right now, there's some people that we believe take their job very seriously and want to do a good
Hmm.
job and have to stand up there with the ones who just don't give a damn. And that's got
Hmm.
to be really tough, but it's part of it. I mean, imagine you're on the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals. There are always judges who are fighting and diametrically opposed, but got to sit up there and have their picture taken together all the time. So,
It's sad. I mean, it's not a life that most people would be envious of if they were actually in it. But I do think, to segue how we started, that TikTok that we watched of this child talking about his younger sibling, and we'll repost it on Judging the Judges, Judgy on TikTok, because it's about 5 or 6 minutes long. And I had an emotional reaction to you. I think you texted me back and was like, that was powerful. What'd you say? I
yeah, it
think.
was tough. I don't remember. Yes, I think I said that was powerful. It was it was hard. It was hard to see, I've got teenage boys. I've got two teenage
Mhm.
sons. So imagining one of them taking to social media out of desperation because he has been isolated and estranged from his brother, and knowing, at least this child on this video that we're talking about describes a parent who is, for lack of a better word, abusive. And it sounds
Yeah.
like, from his point of view, it's abusive. It sounds like objectively it's a pretty abusive situation. And his brother is been placed with the other parent who is abusive, and he's been placed with his father. And I mean, it seems like a call of desperation, reaching out
Mhm.
to the public that this is the situation I'm dealing with. My brother's been taken from me. He's been left in a terrible situation with an abusive parent. The court everything that I tried to tell the judge fell on deaf ears. No matter what we tried to say about how she was treating us, the judge didn't seem to care. And, it seemed like a last resort, resorting to going on social media.
And I wonder how judges would feel about that. And that goes back to the problem. I don't think, from what I could gather with this young man, that he'd ever actually spoken to a judge. He says that he had talked about his GAL. And so you wonder, these judges have insulated themselves from hearing these things directly from children that are affected. But I think that the game of telephone is troublesome, even with the best of intentions. But there's no reason that a child shouldn't be able to go in and talk to a judge, the judge that's making a decision about the life of that child, period, end of story. I don't know where we decided that, quote unquote, that was bad and traumatic, but what makes sense is to pay lawyers without training a couple $100 an hour to talk to the kid maybe once, twice, 3 times.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. This is an articulate, mature kid. He looked like, it could have been 18 already looking at the video. I didn't get any indication that that's why he waited, but I don't know how old this child is. Maybe this child was 18 and that's why his custody, where he resided wasn't part of this. And it's all about his brother. I don't know, but there's no reason why he shouldn't have been in court able to just give a firsthand description of what's going on in this problematic household. And, what I remember early on in my practice, a child being cross-examined in chambers and realizing how traumatic it was and how tough it was, and seeing how the family court put things in place and had a GAL. And in that case, we had a GAL who did a phenomenal job. I've never seen anyone speak to a child that way. It just took a lot of skill to take the pressure away, but it was really important in that situation to find out from that child what was happening with physical abuse. There was no other way to do it. And honestly, the person that was being accused of the abuse had a right to hear it from that child. And I didn't see it again for a very long time. And you had certain courts who just had a rule against it. And they would say, we don't call children as witnesses. And in order to not have to call children as witnesses and put them through that trauma, we'll allow a certain amount of hearsay in our courts. And I remember Judge Feely in Oldham County saying that on the record in one of my cases, that in this court, we can hear from the GAL what kids are saying directly. And that was back when GAL FOC was sort of conflated into one role. And I had a lot of problem with that, but I also had seen how traumatic it was for this one child. I sat in there. So it's always been this, I understand the concern for children. I've seen CLE presentations where they interview kids that went through the family court system that are now judges because it was so impactful and traumatic to them that they wanted to make sure that they protected other kids. But at the same time, this child's video sounds like a game of telephone. And you're absolutely right. When you have the child, the fact finder, the judge, insulated by 1 step, sometimes 2 steps from the actual facts, you have a game of telephone. I think that's the best description for it.
And the bigger thing too is, and I really think, and not every GAL, not every FOC is bad. I am not saying that. I don't ever speak in absolutes where everyone's this or everyone's that. But you and I have both offered a shit ton of money to let a current FOC or GAL investigate their lives and make recommendations. But I think the bigger issue too is some of these GALs and FOCs, there's no way that the judges would allow them to make recommendations about their children's lives. Period, end of story. Period, end of story. And if they would, and I would list all of their names because I don't want to call one of them out, going down the list, like if Judge Johnson, Judge Sandry, blah, 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 sit them down and say, you would let X person make recommendations about your children. You would let Y make recommendations about your children. Not a single one of them under oath would say that they would, yet they continue to appoint these people. And so I think that's where you also have, from when you started, the problems where when people were initially, like when GALs were few and far between, people took it very seriously. And now they just hand those appointments out like candy. And these people have got a godlike complex.
Well, I think there are 2 problems that make it worse, that compound it. Well, actually, it's really one. It's not handing out, it's not so much handing out the appointments. It's deference given to the FOCs. And you talk about this godlike complex. Well, when you treat them like the ultimate arbiter of fact and law, then they are
Yep.
essentially the god of the case. And that's not what it's meant to be. And it just amplifies so many of the problems that are already there. I mean, there's always going to be a balance, especially in custody cases.
Hmm.
And with sensitive fact patterns like any kind of abuse, there's going to be this tendency to want to balance the trauma on the children with getting to the bottom of the actual facts so that you can make the decision that's in the best interest of the children. And, you know, the way that the courts have sort of landed on, instead of calling children as witnesses when they need to be, but maybe putting some things in place, doing it in chambers, doing it in a different environment, but still allowing them to testify or requiring them to testify, they've just farmed it out and said, now we don't need to
Hmm.
do any of that because we can just have an FOC and a game of telephone that sometimes involves very few conversations and huge lapses of time in between those conversations. For instance, someone might interview a child and find out a few things and not go to court for another 6 months and may not talk to the child
Hmm.
again. And
Yep.
that somehow takes the place of actual fact finding and having the child testify, into getting the scenarios and the facts actually from the child who has experienced them.
And we're also teaching children, like, think about this. Okay. So it's very easy to say we just are presuming that coming to court and telling the truth is going to be traumatic. And that's where you lose me a little bit, because we have, or at least my understanding of what we've learned, and I know I'm not a psychologist, blah, 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 is that having your day being able to tell the truth is supposed to be beneficial, right? But we also have children, and you and I, from talking with people that treat children and their experience with court appointed GALs and FOCs, we have therapists, and that's plural with an S on the end, that are telling us that these kids are seeking help and they're not getting it. And that's the most frustrating part for the therapists that are treating the children, is like, but so we have a system designs that is telling children, okay, this is a person that's appointed to help you. And then you can't get a hold of that person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think it would be fascinating, although I can't imagine how it would ever be permitted, but it would be fascinating to have sort of an exit interview with children that have had a GAL or an FOC to see what they really think, if they feel like they've been heard or they feel like their opinion has been factored into anything that has happened. And
Mhm.
I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this person whose video we're discussing here, is that this person feels like they haven't been heard at all. Like they have
Yep.
experienced things that need to be considered, terrible things that need to be considered when determining the parenting schedule, custody of a child, and no one paid any attention to them. No one listened. No one heard about those facts. And
Yep.
nobody cared.
It's just like what we talk about, and I know I always do this, I get in trouble, blah, blah, blah. But the court is essentially mansplaining, even though it's predominantly female judges, but they're mansplaining to a kid. Okay, well, listen, I want to protect you. And the kid's like, you weren't here with me when XYZ was happening. That's what would protect me. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think that
It's
that
just,
is really, really an excellent observation of what it's like listening to the judges talk to people. That I'm going to, you don't understand what's going on in your life. I'm going to tell you how this works and why I know better. And this
mhm,
court system knows better. And that's tough. And, when I talked about weighing the trauma, versus making sure the person's heard, I'm thinking more with younger kids. There's at some point, you know, where there's an age, there's really is a balancing act, whether the child's mature enough to report facts, in a way that, I don't know. I think there's a balancing test there. I think there's constitutional rights to have anyone accusing you be cross-examined. But I think when you're talking about just who to get the facts from, who to talk to the most, who should always be in court and testifying, when you have very young kids, there are things other than the trauma to the kid that you have to think about. You have to think about the reliability of, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old talking about what happened.
for sure.
I think when you are talking about teenagers, and they're not in allegations of abuse, and they're not actually testifying about what they've lived through. When you have someone who has firsthand knowledge of what a household is like, and they are
Yep.
not being consulted with, they're not being called as a witness. Now, that could easily be, we can't always lay that on the judge or the court system. The attorneys choose who they call for witnesses, and I don't have any indication from this video that someone asked to call this person as a witness and were denied. That could have happened. I don't know. It could be, the way that the system is, it trains the attorneys practicing in it that GALs and FOCs are going to speak for the kids, and you're not going to have children testify. And I remember in my practice when there was no choice but to have a child testify, and I would hate it. I would hate to have even a teenager having to sit there in chambers and tell a judge how a parent who is saying that they're clean and sober is not clean and sober, and here's where they hide their alcohol, and here's, how often they go in and lock the door and I can smell the alcohol, but that's the only person that can do it. It's the person that's lived through it, and they need to be heard. They need to be heard so they can be safe. And when I would try to bring to call a witness like that, I found that I got a lot more pushback from GALs, FOCs, and from opposing counsel, just like, wait a second, we don't call children. And the judges didn't stop me from doing it, which was interesting. That they would allow me to do it, and I would always ask, can we do it in chambers? But it still has to be on the record. It's got to be on video. People have to be able to see it. There's gonna be regular, direct, and cross-examination. It's just maybe in a more comfortable setting. But I got more pushback from the practitioners.
Yeah, I think we're a decade away. Well, it hurts their job. But even if you go back to the Bridgman case, which I know this damn 60-page report is going to be the end of me, but in that whole report where this expert that probably made, if I had to guess, between $20,000 or $40,000 on this family to write this like expert recommendation. And if y'all are new here, this mother lost her children without a hearing based on this FOC report. But the FOC report, I believe, said, well, the two kids therapist, I'm not going to go review those records because I think that relationship is important. It's like, what the fuck? What does that even mean? Like, if you're not going to look at what the children are telling the therapist, why do you even exist? But yet you're going to call and...
Yeah. The kids, when they're in the safest environment, might be more likely to tell the truth when they've been made comfortable. Why review those records? Why not just go by what they tell you when you have these very short, probably video calls, or maybe stop by every few months and talk to them? Why look at what they tell the person, the confidant that they have and they meet with regularly?
Yep. Yeah, and a therapeutic role. It's like, so if it's a violation to go into that therapeutic role, why do we have an attorney talking about somebody that got fired? You know what I'm saying? And I think that FOC also was unable to get a hold of the marriage counseling or the co-parent counselor. So it's like, these are three therapists that actually had a, not day in and day out, but they had a real connection with the people that would be talking about whether or not any of these issues did or did not happen. It's just we've lost our damn mind. We have absolutely lost our damn minds. And I've been away from it for about 2.5 weeks. And it's always one of those things where it's just unbelievable when you try to explain it to someone that's never been through family court, what actually is happening. Like, they look at you like you are Alex Jones.
Yeah, that is true. And I think it's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover because it sounds like a conspiracy theorist and a theory, and it attracts all kinds of different conspiracy theorist versions of it, which is fascinating to me. And it was something that was a little alarming to me when I first started, but then some of the things I thought were conspiracy theories I've not seen them disproved, which is, oh gosh, it's crazy. I want to just to cover ourselves. You said the 60-page expert report. I don't want to call someone something that they're not. So I know that you intend that when you say expert, it's with gigantic air quotes.
Well, I think according to Green v. Boyd in Kentucky, that an FOC is automatically an expert.
Oh,
so
I get it. Okay.
But and so I don't necessarily, that's where I go back and forth too. You have all of this, it's just a shit show, but you have this dichotomy where I'm like, okay, don't trust all of the experts. Okay, but then you need to maybe trust this expert. But we just have 17 people in children's lives, and we've got poor kids out there getting their phones out being like, someone listen to me. Like, who's in charge? And you have a bunch of adults that are just getting rich off this kid, and all this kid wants to do is tell his truth.
Yeah, and from a practitioner's, the firsthand stuff,
Mhm.
a lot of people told me I was crazy for advising people to record things that were going on. But those were the things that came in handy. Okay, that's fine. This person says this isn't happening. They're not in the home and they're getting that directly from one person. But here
Mhm.
is what actually happened on this date. Here's what happened on that date. I've had so many people avoid jail or possible criminal charges because they recorded interactions knowing that they'd be accused of something or knowing that something was going on. And we live in a state where you're allowed to do that. In Kentucky, there are different laws in different places, but the system doesn't seem to want to hear from people who live it firsthand. The parents themselves
Right.
is already going to be discounted because they have an interest in, saying bad things about the other side. But what about the people that actually live in that home, the kids that are affected by it? Why do they have to have their opinions filtered through 3 or 4 different layers sometimes before it gets to the court?
And 3 or 4 layers that are spending their college fund or their down payment on their house too. Like, that's another layer. We're not talking about people that volunteer. We're talking about people that make between 50 and probably $500,000 a year. I would say most custodial evaluators bring in more than $500,000 a year. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I have no idea about that.
But anyway.
The cost for those is extensive. And there are some in the nation that I know that their retainer for my client has been over $70,000 to start. So, well, maybe that wasn't the
Insane.
retainer. Maybe that was the total spent, but I think the total spent was far more than that. I know it was tens of thousands of dollars to get started. So, yeah, I mean, it's
That's
expensive, but
insane.
it would be,
You can cure cancer for less than $70,000.
talk about conspiracy theories. Holy shit. It would be
Sorry.
one thing if we were talking about something that worked, right?
Exactly.
If this was an actual magic solution that ended in
Yes.
better outcomes for kids on a
Mhm.
regular basis, then I would imagine there are a lot of parents who would say that's priceless. I would pay any amount,
Yes.
no matter what happens. You can find other ways to pay for college, but if your life is ruined before you get to college, then what's the
Mhm.
point? So let's solve this problem. The thing is, it's not solving problems, it's creating them. It's making
Yep.
things worse. It's prolonging the trauma, it's prolonging the litigation, and frankly, it's allowing the judges, not all judges, I don't like to speak in absolutes either, but it's allowing a lot of judges to be extremely lazy with doing their job. They're just farming it out to
100.
these people.
Best way to end it. We also have gotten some submissions from people. Some want to remain anonymous. Some are wish to speak. I would like to get some audience feedback. Obviously, Hugh and I will discuss, but do you guys want to hear from children that were products of divorce that are now adults? I would never speak to a child
Yeah, of
personally.
course,
I
of
wouldn't.
course.
But I'm really torn about it. But I'm interested in the feedback, and I do think we have a lot to learn. And I don't want to be a hypocrite. I want to be able to give them a voice too. So y'all let us know. And it's almost 2026.
Wow. Wow, just a few days away.
Mm-hmm. Right, bye.
See ya.
We need some justice. My life is fine, justice.
Content of this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be and should not be construed as legal advice. Engaging with this content does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the hosts, guests, or their firms. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any law firm, company, or organization. We make no representations or warranties regarding the accuracy, completeness, or applicability of the information presented. Any reliance on the information in this podcast is at your own risk. Laws are constantly changing, and every situation is unique. You should always seek the advice of a qualified attorney for your specific legal concerns.